All right, Jack Kuenzle, it's great to have you back on the Single Track podcast.
Great to be back. I was kind of hoping to be the first repeat guest, but I think you've had about 20 of them so far. So,
And I think one thing we were talking about offline, you said don't script this thing, and I promise we won't. But I do think we should skip the background stuff, and if anybody wants to get insight into how you got into ultra running and the FKT scene and what you've done fall of 2021, go listen to our first episode. But you have done a lot since we last talked in October. I think you've done Shasta, you've done Hood, you have done my personal favorite, the White Mountains 100. And I know that I don't want to bury the lead, which is the Bob Graham round, but can you talk just for a little bit about that White Mountains 100 FKT and like what went into it, what it's all about, and I guess like what drew you to it?
Yeah, so the White Mountains 100 it's basically the Appalachian Trail crosses over a bunch of 4,000 foot peaks in New Hampshire. And if you go and look at the distance from the road crossing south of the furthest south 4,000 foot peak to the road crossing north of the furthest north 4,000 foot peak, by the AT book, it's 100.6 miles. And so it's just kind of a fairly obvious line for a 100-mile kind of FKT effort. That New Hampshire is widely considered the most rugged portion of the AT, and there's about 145 miles of the AT in New Hampshire, and the most rugged portion of that 145 miles is the 100 miles that traverses those 4,000 foot peaks. So 100 miles, about 36,000 feet of climbing, and just like horrifically technical. Nothing, I think it would be pretty impossible to kill yourself doing it, but certainly there's a lot of potential to, break an ankle or an arm. That's kind of like the level of exposure there, but surprisingly a large amount of time, like, using your hands. Bits are certainly, class 2, and there's like even a couple of like weird, borderline kind of scrambly sections just going through the woods on the Appalachian Trail. It's pretty extreme, I think, for people out west who are used to the Colorado Trail or the PCT. But yeah, it's super rowdy. I was personally hoping to do it under 24 hours. I had originally tried it last October, and I think I talked about it on your pod last time, but basically dropped because my feet just got super kind of not even blistered, just kind of trench foot or something, immersion foot, just because it was pretty wet out there, and there's a fair number of stream and river crossings. But went back this time. I did it north to south. I missed the 24-hour mark by 2 hours and 9 minutes, so 26:09. But yeah, it's going to be. I left some time out there for me personally, absolutely. I never thought I'd say this, but I definitely would consider going back and doing it again. But yeah, it's really when it comes down to it, it's really the technicality is the issue. Just because you're constantly, it's a lot of jumping that I find to go quickly. And I tried everything I could to I was constantly thinking about like moving efficiently, moving smoothly, trying not to get a ton of really powerful forces on my legs by jumping down the rocks. But if you're trying to move quickly, it's really impossible. And so it's just hundreds of thousands of, or not hundreds of thousands, it's thousands of, 2 foot, 3 foot drops. And eventually that all adds up and just kind of destroys you. So yeah, it's a great line. It's so far a woman, Christina Folkic, was the first to do it in a single push successfully. And I don't think it's been seconded in a single push since, other than me. So I know some folks have attempted it. I know there's a guy going to do it. One of the guys who paced me is going to do it pretty soon. So yeah, it's a great line, and I think people who are kind of looking for a steeper, mountainous 100-miler should definitely look at it. The other thing that makes it kind of nice is there's at least 4 or 5 road crossings on it with parking lots and great access, and there's other points you can hike into. So there's a lot of support accessibility. So no, it's a great route, and I'd be super hyped if more people went out there and raced it. Yeah.
Is it a pretty straightforward line too? Like when I think of the Appalachian Trail, I think of all of these white blazes every 500 feet. Like, is it something that listeners out there could on-site if they wanted to, or does it require a little bit of course recon ahead of time?
You could 100%. I mean, if you're looking to just do it, I mean, you could on-site it, but if you're looking to do it properly, you'd really need to come from somewhere with similar style of running. So, I mean, you could on-site it if you're coming from the Adirondacks or the Catskills, but that's like so close that you could just drive to it. If you're coming from out west, I think it's just gonna be challenging just because, I mean, possibly if you're doing a lot of like, scrambling, like in the Alpine, I would say the terrain is probably very similar to Nolan's. Just I've been kind of looking at some footage from Nolan's, and it kind of seems it's kind of close to that from the little I've seen. So if you're used to moving on terrain like that, then yeah, absolutely you could on-site it.
When you talk about potentially going back for a second time and you think about where you can make time up to go under 24 hours, is it just giving more on the uphills, or is it being a little bit more reckless on the descents, understanding that all of this is a pretty gnarly route and it may take some heroics to shave time off?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I mean, the first thing is some of it yesterday or 2 days ago on the Bob was kind of elucidating a little bit, because first, if you have a pacer structure, if you have pacers that are like that, if you just have so many pacers that you really don't need to think at all, and you can just focus on running the entire time, and you don't need to, you constantly have a stream of nutrition and water, and you don't need to carry anything, like that makes an enormous difference. And that could probably, in my case, I don't know, that could probably shave off an hour if I had pacers the entire time who had all my food and water, and I didn't have to think about that at all. That could shave off at least probably an hour. And then on top of that, it's interesting because I felt much more wasted after the Bob than I did after the 100. And I don't know why that is. I think there's one possibility that the 100 is so long that just, I mean, you just can't, maybe you can't dig yourself as deep as you can. And the Bob for me was just like this mid distance where I could just really annihilate myself. Whereas the 100, like I was very fatigued at the end of it, but I feel like my muscles, I feel like I wasn't as much pain. Like I finished the Bob and I was like sobbing, uncontrollably. And it wasn't like joy or anything. It was just like, I don't know what, my brain was just kind of destroyed. And I was so incredibly nauseous. And I finished the 100 and I ate right afterwards. It wasn't all that problematic. So I think hypothetically, maybe I could have, I feel like I could have maybe pushed harder. Possibly is that like having that immediate access to food and water on the Bob just kind of enabled me to push a little bit deeper than I could. I mean, granted, all I was doing was just wearing a vest. I mean, I don't know how much that would actually prevent me from pushing on the 100, but just speculating. So, yeah.
Okay, well, remind me later in the conversation, because I want to have a conversation about this breakdown when it comes to skill versus endurance in these quote unquote shorter versus quote unquote longer FKT attempts. But the last thing that I want to ask you about as it relates to the White Mountains 100, I want to hear you talk a little bit about personal passion versus the competitive nature of these routes when you're choosing what to do each year. And let me also say that with the caveat that given your pedigree in the FKT scene now, especially post Bob Graham, I feel like everything you touch, you have like the Midas touch. So like every route becomes like now like gold and a standard for other activists in the community to consider important. So I don't know, where does the White Mountains 100 fall on that spectrum for you and why?
Wow. Yeah. So I guess when I approach my season, I kind of divide things up into things that I see as like a personal passion project that maybe doesn't have a huge competitive history, or I feel like for me personally, I know I could get the time, but it's a route that I care about a lot. So I'm racing it basically for the future. And that's because it's a route that I think should be highlighted and other people should compete on. And that's because I think it's a route that will be competitive one day, and I want to race it now. And I'm going to, 5-10 years from now, I'll be able to see how good that time actually is. So when I reflect on this year, the Bob, the Tranter, Shasta Ascent, Mount Hood round trip on skis, those were kind of the competitive projects. And then Mount Talak round trip on skis, Mount Shasta round trip on skis, and the Whites 100, those were kind of the future passion project type of things. And there was no, and as far as level of effort or commitment for any of these, there was no difference between the passion project and competitive ones. I think the like just FKTs just haven't been around long enough for there to be a huge competitive history on a lot of these routes. So if I wanted to keep, I'm just being completely honest, if I wanted to keep racing things I'm super stoked on, I'm getting to the point where it's going to be a lot of like passion projects, just because, I mean, I don't want to sound ridiculous, just because I've gotten fairly good, and I'm just confident enough where it just doesn't really provide that stimulus going into something knowing I can probably get it. And there is obviously a ton of super competitive FKTs out there in the States that I totally could not get. But just, where the FKTs exist, where I'm super interested in them and they're like the right amount of competitiveness, I'm just kind of running out of those. And then there's obviously things like Long's Peak or the Grand, which are just our fifth class and are a little bit beyond me right now. So yeah, I think I love the Bob. It's hard for me to say, like, the Bob, every time I finish a route, I always say, like, hey, this is the best route of all time. And I think that's just reflective of the fact there's a lot of really good routes out there. I'll say that the Bob maybe isn't the most aesthetic route in the world. It's not the most aesthetic route that I've done. But from, like, a cultural kind of, like, history and, from, like, this human kind of perspective, I really don't know how it could get any better. You're starting and finishing in this like beautiful town. You're going all in and out of like these farmers' fields. Like, you're surrounded by sheep. You have, all these like beautiful kind of villages around. There's this really like great community feel, like having the pacers, and that's like the whole idea. It's like why you have to be observed on each summit. Part of it, they've kept that around because they want people to have to go out and seek out pacers, and they want it to be like a community thing. And from that perspective, I don't think there's a better route out there. You're not allowed to pay your support on the Bob. So as much as I wanted to compensate people for gas for driving here, you're not allowed to. And we're going to do, my parents are actually coming out for the States, and we're going to do a dinner with all the support tomorrow night, and the Blands, which will be super exciting. Billy Bland being the guy who got the record in 1982 on the Bob and stood for 36 years until Kilian broke it. But you're not allowed to compensate any of your support crews. So, and that, I think, honestly elevates it a little bit beyond, there are tons of races in Europe that are super, community driven, grassroots, whatever. But this, I think, is unique, that nobody is getting compensated, which is everyone's just there, just because they're passionate about it. So I think, from that community perspective, I think the Bob is the greatest route in the world. I mean, the Whites 100 and the Hut Traverse are certainly, I think, would also kind of be up there in that kind of category of that human element, but nothing, I think, will compare to the Bob. So
that's interesting. I had never, and I do. Let's talk about the Bob here in just a second. But you mentioned a couple interesting things. So with most like large scale, I'll use the term professional FKT attempts. Are you saying a lot of those are heavily financed and compensated? Like, if we're talking about like Carl Meltzer's AT FKT back in 2016, or what like Scott Jurek did or Tim Olson did, like are those, there's a lot of money exchanging hands?
No, I honestly wasn't even thinking about those. I was thinking about, kind of this routes with this like human element and this cultural element. And I think the other efforts that exist in that category are races in Europe, in my mind, where there's like, this huge, the community is super about trail running and everything, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I mean, it's not really my place. I mean, they can do whatever they want, but the way, maybe it's just because I'm a curmudgeon or something, but like the way Adidas Terex, some of the material that they made to promote Timothy Olson's like PCT FKT attempt, and like the amount of like pre-spray there was like before he did that, I mean, kind of bothered me a little bit. But I mean, there's really no justification for that, probably. It just, I don't know if I can explain my reasoning beyond, I just don't like it. it's the same way when I think about when I first started skiing. I remember I went out first backcountry skiing and I had like Black Diamond gear and I like posted on my Instagram story. I remember like tagging Black Diamond, like that made sense. And I just look back and I'm just like, why the fuck would I do that? Like, I don't know why the companies that like manufacture the gear like just hold such a large part of the culture. Maybe I'm crazy, but like it just like it kind of bothers me that I like went outside and like had this outdoor experience and I felt necessary to like participate in this this like consumerist spray on social media. And I think it's things like the way Adidas publicized the PCT FKT that kind of like influences that. And it's like, hey, what's the problem with that? I don't know. I just like, an idea of sport that just doesn't involve consumerism and like selling shit. I am not sponsored by Innovate. I love Innovate shoes, and I used Innovate shoes for the Bob, and there were folks at Innovate that were enormously helpful as to acquiring pacers. And there was a woman at Innovate, Tori Miller. I'm sorry, Tori, if you're listening to this. I don't actually know what your role is at Innovate, but she was enormously helpful getting pacers. She was like, just so incredibly helpful. And she actually, we were talking about like, how can we like not compensate the pacers, but like, show our appreciation. And so I was going to go out and buy a bunch of pastries and like innovate. Tori spent the entire afternoon and baked like all these pastries to like support the pacers, or to like to give to the pacers afterwards. And I don't know. It's like, why am I even saying this? For me, like, I just think a lot about, Innovate helps me with this. And I am, they asked me, they're like, hey, is this okay if we put this on our social media that you're going for this and you're doing this? And I was like, yeah, so I don't know, maybe I'm kind of, I think I have a little bit of trouble. I have these like constructs in my head of like what these corporations or races or anything else is kind of like. And when I actually meet people in person, everyone's always so fantastically nice. So,
well,
listen,
kind of
rambling a little bit.
No, not at all. No, you know that I absolutely love talking about the confluence of trail running and commercialization and sponsorship and influencers and sticking it to the man. So no, we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that later in the conversation. We got to set the table here because I've been a bad host. I do think that there are. I think a lot of people are now familiar with you, but I think there are still a lot of listeners that are uninitiated when it comes to like what the Bob Graham is, I should say, what it is, where it's located, the history behind it, why it's important on the FKT scene. So can you set the stage for all of that?
Yeah. So I'm probably going to butcher this a little bit, to be completely honest, but so the English Lake District is an area in northwest England that I'm pretty sure physically borders Scotland. I mean, I'm like an hour from Scotland or 45 minutes from Scotland right now. And it's the most mountainous area in England. It contains the highest point in England, Scafell Pike, which is like 3,200 feet. And it's got, just a bunch of like just absolutely like beautiful mountains. And it's got a like huge history of fell running. So, fells are kind of like the way they refer to hills over here, I believe. And it's good, people just obviously have raced for a long time in this area. And so it still used to be and still is a very common challenge to kind of see how many peaks you can summit in 24 hours. And they have some way of defining what a peak is that kind of escapes me. But there was a attempt back in the 1930s by this guy, Bob Graham, who was essentially just a hiker, where he summited 42 peaks in 24 hours. And it took a long time. I believe it took until the 1960s before anybody actually added on a peak to that, went to 43 peaks. And so for a while, before anybody was able to actually go fast enough where they could add another peak on, it just became a thing where people would just race the line that Bob Graham did. And went back and forth. I don't really know the history of it, but in 1982, this local fell runner who lives in the Borrowdale Valley, which is like basically right at the center of the Bob Graham, Billy Bland, who's still alive, still lives there, went and ran the route, and he ran it in, I believe, 13:53, and his record stood until 2018, stood for 36 years. And when Kilian broke it, and Kilian ran at 12:52. And so I felt that when I approached this, I felt that the record, and let me just also say the record is about, depending on, the lines you take and your watch or whatever, it's about 63 to 66 miles and about 27,000 feet of climbing. And there's, of that, 5 miles is on the asphalt. There's quite a bit of it that's like, basically absolutely perfect, like the best like climbing and descending you could possibly imagine. It's like running on a golf course that's like 30% grade. In a lot of places, it's like incredibly fast terrain. And there's other places like large areas, especially on leg 3, that are like very similar to the presidential range, where it's like a lot of like rock hopping, like exactly the same as the presidential range, and even a 5th class section, which I was not aware of going into this. But the fastest line between 2 peaks on one section is low 5th class, and it's only like 1 or 2 moves. And I actually wanted to scout it, wasn't able to scout it before, so I was on sighting it. Definitely is doable without a rope, but I did have a rope around my waist for that. There was a fair amount of slack when I actually did the moves, and the rope was just looped around my waist, so I probably would have been chopped in half if I had actually fallen. So I knew this route I knew Kilian's time was potentially slightly soft going into this, or I thought Kilian's time was slightly soft going into this, because I figured, I just look at the amount of transformation in like strategy and tactics and training and nutrition and everything else that happens in the last 5 to 10 years. And then also like how significant it is and how important it is to have like a mark to chase after. And I actually don't know how fast the time was that Billy Bland was trying to break when he ran a 13:53, but I felt like there is no way that any human being could have run that fast in the 1980s, could have run, like, I'm saying not a 13:53, I'm saying like could have run extremely quickly in the early 1980s, like quickly by today's standards on a route like the Bob Graham, where like there have been revolutions in nutrition, in footwear, everything from like not stopping at the aid stations to, fueling, every, per hour, and like the way that the trods and the trails have developed here, how they used to be probably quite overgrown, and now they've been, just kind of beaten into the ground. So it's much faster. I just felt like there's no way a 1982 time could possibly compare. And I think that is by far like the craziest achievement in ultra running, that he was able to do that. And I mean, he was out there and he was like drinking beer. I mean, not like as a joke. I mean, it was like something that they like did back then, I guess, like drinking beer. Like at one point he stopped and he like had a sandwich with somebody. It just like, I mean, I cannot imagine, like I think if you took me back to Billy Bland's day and you had me run with those tactics, I would have run like fucking, I don't even know, like, I don't know, 17 hours at least. I can't even imagine. His stopping time, you can look it up. Like you can see his splits. There's exact splits are online. You can see what his exact stoppage time was. It just blows my mind. And the craziest thing about Billy is I was lucky enough to sit down with him for earlier this week. And I mean, if I had to come up with a list with like my 10 favorite human beings I've ever interacted with, like Billy Bland would 100% be on the fucking list. And Billy,
how
come? Just because, I mean, clearly he's like brilliant. Clearly, like he's an incredibly smart guy. To have like to have run that time when he did, he clearly had to be like multiple generations ahead. Like not only or just like incredibly lucky that he came up with the right formula. But I think it's probably the former. And he is like incredibly honest. He's like extremely blunt and like really funny guy. And obviously very fast. And it's that probably affects my perception of people more than it should. But yeah, he's very fast. But he so that season, he was telling me that he raced. There's obviously a ton of very famous fell races around here, and he raced super fast times on two fell races, basically with the Bob Graham in the middle. And he just like had a window in his schedule, and he just decided to do the Bob then.
What makes Billy Bland such an interesting guy?
So Billy, he was telling me that he was actually happy when Kilian broke that record, because he said he went into that record attempt like it wasn't even a big focus for his season. So there are a ton of fell races in the Lake District, and he had a pretty full schedule that year. And he went and set a course record at a super, super famous fell race here, the Borrowdale Fell Race. And the course record still stands today. I think he ran a 2:43, I think it was, or possibly it was even faster than that. And there are routinely years where nobody breaks 3 hours. And like these dudes are like pretty, I mean, I think they're quite objectively fast locally. And so that's insane in its own right. So he was telling me the Bob Graham wasn't even a big focus of his. It was just it was an opening of the schedule, and he just decided to do it. And he's produced this time, and he was telling me he's uncomfortable with it because it's become like the main thing he's known for, but it wasn't even something he really focused on all that much. And so hearing all that, like I felt like that there must be room for the time to go faster, because if Kilian, the greatest the greatest ultra runner, like mountain runner of all time, ran just 1 hour faster, and with all the things that have improved in tactics and nutrition and training and footwear and pacing and everything else, then there's just no way that the time is that stiff. But I mean, clearly, the Billy Bland is just like absolutely insane runner. So yeah, I think that basically covers the Bob. I'm trying to think of anything else that's pretty significant about it.
Well, let me ask one more question. So just to set a little bit more context, why is the Bob Graham round so exalted in the FKT community? Like, what makes it one of the premier routes worldwide, in your opinion?
Yeah, so there's in Great Britain there are three countries, Scotland, Wales, and England, and so each one of these countries has like what's become almost like their national like round. And for whatever reason, this is where like competition is kind of consolidated. And so in Scotland, it's the Charlie Ramsey round. In Wales, it's the Paddy Buckley, and in England, it's the Bob Graham. And the Paddy Buckley, I think, is like pretty. I've heard it's boggy, it's rougher. The Ramsey is pretty rough. It's got some pretty big bog. It's like very remote. And the Bob Graham is just, there are some boggy bits, but it's just so beautiful. Like the way it starts and finishes in this amazing like small little town. It's just like incredibly good running. Like any one of the legs by itself would make like an amazing FKT. And the fact they all like link together and make like this loop with like just a little bit of road running at the end is pretty bonkers. You have like the first leg, you come right out of town, 3,000 foot climb, straight out of town, and then to this beautiful peak, Skidda, that like overlooks Keswick, the town where the route starts and finishes. And then, you wrap around, you hit another peak that's pretty boring. You go through some bog, that's kind of shit. And then you just like have this amazing ridgeline descent down to the first aid station. It just, I'm not going to go through the whole thing and bore everybody, but just like every section has its like unique character, and it's just so amazing. And the whole thing just kind of like orbits around the Borrowdale Valley, and it's just so beautiful. So I think part of the reason it's so famous is because Billy Bland's record stood for so long, and that kind of gave it a lot of fame. I think also the fact Kilian coming here and racing it probably had a big impact on raising its profile. I think that's probably when I found out about it. It's funny though, when you talk to people in Keswick, like they're shocked. They're like, how the hell did you hear about this? Like living in the United States. I was like, okay, I don't know. I think part of it is Kilian, and part of it is probably John Kelly, who came over here and did a lot of longer FKTs in England and all over the UK. So, yeah.
How much? So you talked about this whole thing coming on your radar when Kilian did it a couple years back. did you get any intel on Kilian's experience during that time and what he did well, what he struggled with, and logistically where he was at with everything?
Yeah. So basically what I did was, I'll loop into this a little bit. So my goal originally was to come over here and just like race some FKTs in the UK. I like had a very vague vision. It was like originally to go to Colorado, and I was worried about this. I was worried about the smoke, and so instead I came out here, and I felt like I couldn't go straight into the bob because you need to have like this huge depth of pacers, and I just like didn't have any times in the UK or anything that like someone in the UK would really appreciate or know or care about, running up in New Hampshire. So I felt like I had to get a time here. So I raced up in Scotland. I raced the Tranter round, which is the most aesthetic section of the Ramsey round, and which had a very, very fast FKT. And after I did that, I met with the guy who had the Tranter record, who is the best fell runner in the UK, Finley Wild, who's the man. And he told me, hey, when you go down and do the bob, like you have to meet with Martin Stone. Like Martin Stone's got to coordinate all your shit. And so Martin, who is kind of runs like the UK equivalent of Ultra Sign Up. I believe it's a company called SI Entry. And he was doing the timing for a race up in Scotland, which Kilian won. And they're both kind of just standing there on the finish line. And Martin gets to talking to Kilian about the Bob Graham and gives him his contact information. And things just kind of progressed from there. Kilian kind of communicated with Martin a little bit. He was thinking about coming out in the fall of 2017, I believe. The conditions were pretty shit. And then Kilian had, I think, surgery on his shoulder. He broke his leg at Pyramenta. And then Kilian went and raced Marathon of Mont Blanc in early July and won it either on Saturday or Sunday. And at that same time, the UK and at least the Lake District was going through this historic drought. And so there are some bogs on the Bob Graham. And so if it is drier conditions, you certainly can move faster. And so Martin reached out to Kilian and I don't think they had talked in a while, and he congratulated him on his win at Marathon of Mont Blanc. And he was talking about how good the conditions were. And Kilian's like, oh yeah, I know. I believe it was on a Monday. He goes, yeah, I know. I'm coming out to the UK very, very soon. I'll be arriving tomorrow. And and Martin was like, what? Because you need to be observed on every summit. And so you need to have like a super strong team of pacers. And so Martin gave Kilian a list of names to contact. And I believe Kilian texted all these guys, and no one was really getting back to him, or no one was really available. Like Kilian was getting a very cold response. And so Martin did some digging around, and he found out this super fast local dude was going for an attempt on the Bob, but he was considering canceling it due to the weather being super hot, I believe. And the local guys are so fucking funny here. And I believe the way this went down was this guy was like, look, if Kilian wants my pacing team, he's gonna have to give me a fucking call. And Martin was like, all right. And he texts Kilian, is like, hey, can you call this number and ask this guy if you can use your team? And Kilian called him up, and the guy was like, yeah, of course. And so this super stallion team just transferred from this local dude basically to Kilian. And Kilian, I believe, showed up on Tuesday and recued the route Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then Martin sat down with him on Friday and was like, hey, you thinking about going for it next week? And Kilian's like, no, I'm going to do it on Sunday. And, Kilian went out and ripped it on Sunday. And he certainly had much drier conditions than me. He also had much hotter conditions than me. He was probably also much better heat trained than I was. So a bit of a wash there, but I would say I probably had better conditions than he did. There's a lot of focus paid here to how dry the bogs are, but I think it's more important to have cool conditions. Part of the problem is nobody in the UK is ever heat trained unless you're getting in the sauna a ton, which I tried to do, but I think it was a little too late. So yeah, Kilian, I didn't talk to Kilian directly before this. I mean, it's not like I have his phone number or something. Yeah, I thought about it. So the night before I did the Bob, so this was Thursday night, I was gonna like email Kilian and let him know. I found his, like, I got some old pacing documents and I found his email and I was like, oh my God. And I was gonna email him and then I was like kind of too scared. And then all of a sudden Martin texted me and was like, hey, Kilian's excited. He said he's going to be dot watching tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God, you got to be fucking kidding me. And yeah, so just to describe, without talking to him, the way I kind of see Kilian's attempts going down, like fell running has this like very specific traditions of racing. Like you're not allowed to use poles. You go out, at least back in the day, you used to go out from the start as hard as possible. And, whatever happens, 100 meters past the starting line is just like to be figured out later. Like pacing, like wasn't really a thing. And so like Billy Bland went out on like one and he ran it in like 2 hours and 13 minutes. And so I think Kilian's pacers were like, all right, we got to go faster than that because Kilian, is faster than Billy. And so they just ripped leg one so fast. I think they ran like a 205, 207, somewhere in there. And I think Kilian just was hurting from that, a little bit of issues with the heat. And when he got to leg four, he basically sat down for about 6 or 7 minutes just right before one of the aid stations. And just from the video I saw, he was just pounding calories. So like, I don't know if he was behind on nutrition, and then he got up and he ran down to the road. He stopped for another 3 minutes and then rolled into the finish line. So, and his Finley Wild attempted the, big UK fell runner. He attempted the route and he ran a 12:59, so 7 minutes slower than Kilian, but he split that last leg 10 minutes faster. So I think Kilian was just kind of destroyed by the end of it by that super fast opening pace. So my strategy going into it was like, okay, I'm just going to like try to run 8 minutes slower and then basically just not stop at the road crossing. So that would save me about 4 minutes. And then I'd get to this place where Kilian sat down and that would save me about 6 or 7 minutes. And I'll, roll into town 3 minutes ahead of him. And I think the way that's that. So that was, yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't know why my mind goes here, but I think about how contrived the Breaking 2 marathon project was in Italy with like Kipchoge, and how everything was planned essentially a year in advance. And I'm sure Kilian could have done the same thing with the Bob Graham round, but that's just an amazing story that he kind of goes in there like basically last minute to do his thing. And even when he decides to do that, despite being probably the most powerful mountain runner in our sport who can pull a lot of strings, he had to go through all of the local customs to make it happen. He had to call the guy and request the transfer of pacers. I love that story.
Yeah. And I texted this guy and somebody gave me his number. I texted him trying to get him to support mine. And then immediately the person who gave me his number is like, hey, make sure you don't text him. Like, you got to call him. Like, this guy's old school. And I was like, fuck. I mean, so I was like, hey, I think we should talk this over the phone instead. But I mean, he wasn't available on a weekday to do it when I ended up doing it on a Friday. But yeah, it's just very, very funny. I mean, I love like local guys. I mean, just like super, super fucking funny dudes. Yeah. So.
Another thing I want to talk about, and this is something I do appreciate about the way you approach our sport, you pretty much go all in for every single project you pursue. So maybe talk about everything you did to make this possible, like from getting to the region early to train and recon and buying the vans. I think I saw you bought a van. Like, just talk about everything you did to orient your life to focusing on this.
Yeah. So basically, I guess my kind of philosophy is like, if I'm going to do something, I really have to like do it full tilt if it's my focus, because like, I mean, coaching is rewarding and I do enjoy coaching, but it's like, it's not like I need something else in my life, and I need something else I feel like that's like meaningful and like constructive. And if that's going to be running, then I'm going to like try to do the best that I can. And so for this, what I did was at the end of June, this was like a week and a half after the 100. Fortunately, my dad used to fly for Delta Airlines. So as long as there's some availability on the flights, then I can fly like last minute for super cheap. So I flew out to the UK. I bought a van, a 2002 Mazda Bongo, which living in that has gotten really fucking old. But because the seats, you like sleep on the seats, lie down, but the seats like don't lie completely flat, and so it's just if you lie on your side, then your feet are just like sticking up into space, and it's just because like it's just kind of complicated, but it's just no good. And so I think when it comes to racing over here, coming from the U.S., when it comes to fell racing over here, you have to adjust to kind of like making up your own lines and going off trail, and that's like not only like macro finding your own lines like between peaks. So like, oh, am I gonna go like around, or am I gonna take like the direct route between two summits, or am I gonna go around this big rocky patch, or am I gonna run over the rocky patch? You know, that's like the classic kind of decisions. But there's also tons of like micro tiny route finding. Like, okay, does it make sense to cut the switchbacks here going up or down? Like this terrain is super steep. Like, can I control descent on it if I skip the switchbacks here? This terrain, you know, you'll have like a rocky section, a rocky downhill directly parallel by like a strip of grass. And it's like, okay, if I run down the rocks, I may be able to go faster, but if I run down the grass, like maybe I can preserve my legs a little bit more. And so there's like, you really have to get used to just like making those decisions, just like constantly on the fly. You have to be used to like downloading like dozens of GPXs from like off, just ripping like files off of Strava and just like trying to figure out like where the best and like the fastest lines are, and just like talking to people to try to determine where the race lines are. And then also I think there is like racing in the Northeast, you need like a lot of explosiveness because the trails are so windy and there's like, you know, so much like, you know, jumping up and over rocks and stepping up and over stuff. Whereas like here, like things are more sustained. Like you get up to the summit, you point downhill, you go downhill for like 2,000 feet. Okay, you point back uphill. Like you don't really need the explosiveness, but you do have to kind of like adjust your body to this like relentless kind of like continuous motion. So I think some of it's physical, some of it's mental. Regardless, like the running in Scotland up around where the Tranter is,
I could get some of that experience running down in running up in Scotland. But when it came to actually like learning the bob, I had to come down here and spend about a month just wrecking the lines. And I probably went and ripped the course like 3 times through total. And there were still, my original plan was to do this later in September. So there were still some lines I wasn't 100% on, but fortunately, like day of, I did have some pacers who did know the lines much better than I did. So yeah, that's kind of what's needed. I mean, it's not enough to just say, okay, like the pacers are going to take me around and I just don't even need to know the route, because this may have been a problem that Kilian kind of encountered. Is I feel like if you don't, he did do the route once, so maybe he had a pretty good understanding. But if you don't know where the route is going, like if you're just following somebody, it's like hard to kind of like do that micro route finding. If you don't know like, hey, what general direction are we heading? Like what's the plan from here? So I think you do have to know the route a fair bit.
All right, so I'm curious if you had to ballpark the number of hours you were investing into this effort when you think about not just time on feet when it comes to training, but like preparing all of your logistics and studying the route, and I guess anything that you think is relevant to preparation. How much time are you investing on like a daily and a weekly basis?
Dude, yeah, I got no clue, because I mean, you can go, when it came to the bob, like you could include everything I did for the Tranter as part of that. I mean, you could go back and obviously like go even further back than that, but and then also when I came down, there was I had met with a number of times with Martin beforehand. And then it wasn't like he just handed me the contact information for 50 people. Like we looked at some local race results and we looked at the pacers that Kilian and Finley had, and we determined like who was still running. And I messaged a bunch of people, and I just would go and just DM them on Instagram. And then yeah, I was meeting a lot with Tori, talking a lot with Tori Miller, trying to get contacts that way. And then like every person I got, I just had a running list of like the people who said that they were interested in pacing. And I would just give them that running list and I'd be like, hey, like, can you look at this list and think of anybody else you think should be on here? And it got to the point by the end of it, like people were reluctant to give me any more names because I already had like 30 people that said they were interested in pacing. And it was getting to the point where I thought it was getting ridiculous. And I was like, there's just no way that I'm going to need this many people. And what ended up happening was I was telling everybody, like, I'm not going to do this before September 10th. I'm not going to look at the weather forecast before September 10th. September 10th, I'm going to start looking for a window. And people would tell me like, hey, like September can be weird. Like you might just get to the point where it just might rain for the rest of the month and you might never have decent conditions. And so what happened is like I went and I trained. I probably did, it was like 43,000 feet of climbing last week and like 105 miles plus like an hour and a half, like, you know, like high intensity, like workout in the Stairmaster. That's like not included in that. And like last Sunday, like I was feeling like pretty cooked from that. Like I wanted to take the day off. Anyways, and I went and I just like checked the weather forecast, even though I was trying not to do that. And I looked and this whole week was dry. And I was like, fuck, like it had already been dried for a couple of days. Like I gotta go for it because I agonized over it for longer than that, but I remembered Mount Hood and like Mount Hood was like the same thing. Like I was in Mammoth Lake. So I was like 13 hours south of Mount Hood. Like I really didn't want to make the drive up. The conditions weren't going to be good. And like a 3-day window appeared on Mount Hood. And I like waited for a long time and I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to drive up and do it. And I drove up and I did Mount Hood and it like, the spring was like abysmal. Like it either rained or dumped snow or was like horrific winds for like the next 6 weeks straight. So with that in mind, I felt like I kind of had to seize the window. I actually put out a poll on my Instagram story, which I got a lot of responses from that. Like people like, you know, kind of cautioning me against waiting. And talked to a bunch of people and I decided to go for it on Friday, Saturday it rained. It rained yesterday and rained some today too. So I had this list of 30 people and, you know, this list I thought that was like ridiculous. And I put them all in a WhatsApp chat and I messaged everybody. And I think out of that list, maybe 3 people ended up coming out just because, you know, it's a weekday. Everybody's busy. And like a lot of these folks or some of these folks were people up in Edinburgh and up in Glasgow, like 2 or 3 hours north of here, like Scottish people who had heard about my Tranter and were like interested in supporting and couldn't make it down on a Friday. So it was like all of a sudden I had 5 days and I was like basically almost in Kilian's situation. And fortunately I did have all these people who kind of saw me attempting to put the groundwork in. And they all messaged, you know, their local running club group chats. And that kind of like spread a little bit. And I posted about it on Instagram a little bit. And I ended up getting like a really, really good team. But that was certainly not easy. And a lot, I don't know how much time went into that, but it was a decent amount because I probably messaged, and there were also people. There was, you know, I went to 3 fell races, you know, just trying to like network and meet people. I went to, you know, on like a club, you know, a Keswick Athletic Club run, and which was honestly just like a ton of fun in its own regard. But all of that honestly was in the end to just, you know, try to like, you know, meet people and get support. So, and then beyond that, you have just kind of like studying the lines and like going through Kilian and Finley's and Beth Pascal's splits and George Foster, who has the now 4th fastest time on the route, and trying to figure out like what the fastest lines were and, you know, what the best terrain was. And then obviously going out and running the route isn't just as simple as, you know, you don't just run it 3 times as a 100K effort. You know, it's starting at the start or starting wherever you park and then hitchhiking back to where you park. And it's, you know, running the course and then running back, you know, some other way. And so, yeah, it's complex. You know, certainly there was a lot of like legwork that went into it beyond just the pure training. So
And then in terms of workload, I heard you mention that you did a 100-mile, 40,000 feet of climbing week just the week prior to your attempt. Was that a pretty standard week for you in the weeks leading up in terms of workload, or was that where you were sort of peaking?
No, I mean, yeah, I was like 105 and 43,000 feet of climbing plus like the Stairmaster. So, I mean, I'd probably say it was probably the equivalent of like, 105 and 47, 48, maybe.
How long were you holding that for?
I've probably done that. I don't even know what the date is, but I've probably done that for like 3 weeks. I probably took a week down after the Tranter and then 3 weeks of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I was feeling really, really good. Which is, it seems like to always be like the popular thing, like right before someone has like actual overtraining syndrome is they feel great. But I was feeling great. And then, yeah, like late last week. So what happened was, I can't believe this was last Thursday. It's crazy. Last Thursday, I went and I ran leg 1 and 2, and I finished at Dunmail at the end of leg 2. And then I hitchhiked to this, like a couple miles north. And then I did like a Keswick Athletic Club, like group run for an hour and a half. And so leg 1 and 2 is like 26 miles and 11,500 feet of climbing. And the group run was like 7 miles and like 4,000 feet of climbing. And like, these guys were like, they were not like, the pace was like fast. And I got done with that. And I was like, kind of like, fuck, like I got a lot of running I got left to do this week. Because I try to really prioritize the speed work. So I will like take a day off, and then the next day I'll go and I'll do my speed work. And then I'll take that day off, and it'll really enable me to like hammer that speed work out. And the next day I'll be like pretty cooked. Like I won't be able to run more than like, 3 hours the day after. And so that's like day off, speed work, 3 hours. That's like 4.5 hours over the course of 3 days. And then you have 4 days to do 20 hours of volume. So either 5 hours every day. I mean, this is on a 24-hour. I mean, typically 24 hours, 24 to like 26 hours is typically what I'm doing. So 4 days to do 20 to 22 hours, it can just kind of stack up. So yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the day itself. And before we talk about the final moments in the celebration, which I think have sort of gone viral on Instagram at least, which they're great photos and great videos and great moments. But can you talk about just in general how the day went, and maybe specifically like what went well, where you had the troubleshoot, where you struggled, stuff like that?
Yeah. So I hadn't seen Martin until, since Friday. So I didn't see Martin yesterday, but I went and got some gear from Martin today. And, Martin was basically my crew chief all day, and he was managing everything. And I don't know how many Bobs he supported. He facilitated Finley's, and he facilitated Kilian's, and he facilitated Billy Bland's back in the day. And he told me that was like by far the craziest Bob Graham he's like ever witnessed or heard of, or that's like ever happened. And it was just like, so, kind of like out of control from the start. Like, we went out, so the goal was to split the first leg 8 minutes slower than Kilian, and then roll with that deficit basically all the way until leg 4, and then not stop where Kilian stopped, basically just like hopefully maintain the same pace through the stops at the aid stations. And that alone would have allowed me to beat his pace. And so the pace up like the first peak felt like super easy. We kept having to dial it back. And then we got down and we ran to the base of the second peak, and we went through like a pretty boggy section, which is, I think in hindsight, what slowed me down. And all of a sudden I look and we split that section from Skidda to the base of Great Calva, all downhill in like a minute 40 slower than Kilian. And then I just like kind of freaked out. And so at this point I had already dropped 2 of my pacers of the 4 I had on leg 1. And the guys left are like, super, super fast local guys. And going up Great Calva is a 10-minute climb. And one of these dudes, like we split the climb like 2 minutes and 20 seconds faster than Kilian. Kilian ran this first section like at an incredibly fast pace, and it was a 10-minute climb. Like, it's not that much room to put 2 minutes on fucking Kilian. And we split it 2 minutes faster. And like Mark, I was going to say, but like, we Mark's like, you know, very quick dude. And we dropped him like so fast. Like we basically time trialed this single section. And I got to the top and I was like, oh my God, like, what have we done? and we, you know, from there, we just took it super slow all the way to the end of like one. But like, what I didn't realize, like part of it was we like ran down, like we're running through this boggy section. I stepped on the section I thought was solid. I fell in up over my knees in mud. And like, I think one of my pacers, I didn't look back, but like one of our pacers had gone around the first peak, and she just like, I think just like face planted in the mud, as I got the impression. Like it was just like total chaos, like in this bog. My Mark was like racing to catch up with us, and he cut off trail through this super rough section. And one of my other pacers had my flip belt with like my phone, a pacer tracker, electrolytes, and caffeine tablets in it that was supposed to get rotated from each pacing crew. And so Mark had taken this from this other pacer who was getting dropped, and Mark just threw it in his vest, and he's running down the super rough section, and it fell out of his bag. And so he ran all the way to the summit of the next peak and he was like racing to catch up with us so he could pass this bag off to Billy, the pacer who had held with me. And all of a sudden he realized he didn't have it. And so he had to run back, and he had to get on his phone and call the crew and been like, hey, can you like walk me on to like where this fucking tracker is? And like, I had no idea like that was happening, but it also had my phone and my earbuds in it, which were proved to be very helpful later on. But like, that was the first leg. And like, I was coming down this like super exposed descent, and I go to Billy. I was like, fuck, like, dude, like, you know, I think Steve and Andy, these pacers for the next leg, are like super fast. But like, I mean, look what happened to Mark just now. Like, I need you to come with me on leg 2. And like, Billy is like, he's like, dude, like, this was supposed to be my rest week. I mean, like, I fucking, Billy Cartwright's like a fucking man. And he's like, but yeah, I'll like fucking do it. And like, you know, no like water, like no nutrition, like he didn't like have anything prepared for this shit. And we just like, and that first leg, you know, so Kilian split that in like 205, 207. It's like 13 miles and like 5,500 feet of climbing. And like, that's like pretty rowdy. And so we split it slower than Billy Bland did. We split it in 214. Finley did it in about 209. And then we picked up Andy. So it was Andy, Billy, and I. Steve had already pushed out and had run up to Cloughhead, which is like the next peak. And so we run up to Cloughhead, and we split that section a minute 30 slower than Kilian. And I'm like, fuck this. Like, I am not like, you know, fucking Kilian was like inside my fucking brain. And I was like, I am not losing another split to this guy. Like, I haven't matched, except for the Great Calva freak out. Like, I haven't matched a single one of his fucking splits. Like, I've been behind all day. And so Steve had like left the aid station early. He had met us on the top of Cloughhead, so he was fresh. And I was like, yo, Andy, Billy, just like keep going. We'll catch up with you on like 2 peaks later. And I'm just going to roll with Steve, and we're just going to like hit these next 2, and we're going to like match Kilian splits. Like, I don't care like what the fuck it takes. And I got to look like what we split that next section at, because I kept looking down at my watch, and it was like consistently sub 6, like every single time I looked down, like, you know, running down this fell. And then we get up to this, I don't know how long that section from Cloughhead to Great Dodd is, but we split it like 3 minutes and 20 seconds faster than Kilian. And I mean, it's probably 10, 15 minutes total split. And then like from Cloughhead all the way to Wasdale, like the end of leg 3, it was just like, I mean, it was like kind of like on fire. Like, it was like going so well. Like, I want to break out like the actual splits and see like where I lost time and where I gained time. But yeah, like it was insane. And like after a while, I told my crew, I was like, I don't want to hear any more fucking splits, because like it just gets in my head. And like I did that for like 5 peaks. And then on like the last peak on leg 2, I was like, how far up are we right now? And it was like 6 minutes up on Kilian or something. And I was like, holy fuck, like that's fucking crazy. And like part of me was like, maybe that's not a great idea. And then, I mean, I was talking to my crew, and my crew was like, look, like, just like, hold this pace. Like, don't go crazy. Like, you'll get this if you just hold this and then, pick up that extra time at the end of leg 4 and then just like finish it. And I was like, yeah, but I know like fucking, Jonathan Albon or like fucking Finley or Kilian is coming back. Like, it's like, if I'm feeling shitty, I'm racing. I said, like, if I'm feeling shitty, if this is going poorly, I'm racing Kilian in 2018. If this is going well, I'm racing fucking one of these motherfuckers in 2023. And so I was like, I just need to make this like as painful as possible for the next fucking person who tries to break it. And so, yeah, we like, there was a rough patch coming out of leg 2, because like, there's just like this super, you come out of leg 2 and there's like a 2,000 foot or like 1,500 foot climb. It was just like super still, no wind, like baking in the sun. And then from there you go into like bog and grass, and it's just like fucking stupid. I mean, Matt Atkinson and Sam Steed were pacing on there, and let me just go back to leg 1. Nick Jackson, Billy Cartwright, Mark Lamb, and Michael McLennan were my pacers on leg 1. And so then leg 2 or leg 3 was Sam Steed, Matt Atkinson, and Jack Erie. And it was like Atkinson was just like, he was so on it. Like, the dude, he teaches math, and he clearly just like has an affinity for like things like that. And he just goes out and he just like runs these legs, and he just like makes up just like wild lines, and he just like compares notes and like, writes everything down and like, times everything. And like, I have run like all the ways that like Finley and like Kilian and Beth Pascal and George Foster did this shit. And he was doing stuff like I had never like, seen before. And like, there were a couple of times like on the smaller ones where I was like, fuck it, I'm not going that way. That's like fucking stupid. And like, I'd go some other way and I'd look and he'd be like way ahead of me. I was like, how the hell is that possible? But yeah, it was amazing. And like they, Matt and Sam just kind of like took control perfectly. And they just like, we ran out of water, and they just like kept pushing like Jack out to like go find water, and like Jack would go find water, and I'd be like, fuck it, we're like never seeing this guy ever again. And then like all of a sudden he'd just like pop out and he'd be like have water for us, and then he'd like go and like meet us somewhere else up ahead. So yeah, it was great. And we it just went really well. Like they told me like, yeah, it was just perfect. And then, the last thing that they told me as leg 3 ended was like, hey, you're going to have another low point. And I'm sorry. So there was a real low point in the bogs there and everything. But like, once we kind of got up on plane and like got some more like water in me, and like the sun went behind the clouds, and I put some earbuds in, like, literally, I was like, Matt, just like fucking, do this. And I would just run and just look at his feet and just like do some like little, like tiny route finding. And he just like ripped. And like, I would just like, I had earbuds in, I couldn't hear what the hell they were saying. And I would just, say what type of nutrition I wanted. And they would just like, Matt would just like pass it back, or Sam would like pass it up to me. And then, I would like drink or eat it. And then I would just throw it ahead of us, and they would just pick it up on the ground. And it was like so perfect. And then like end of like 3, like Sam goes to me, he's like, you're going to have another low point. And I'm thinking to myself, it won't be as bad as Calf Crag and Sergeant Man, because it'll be farther on. It will be closer to the end and everything. And then I knew U-Barrow was going to be bad, because it's like down low. It's a steep climb. It's like 2,000 feet. It's like, you're like 22,000 feet. You're like 21,000 feet at the end of that point. It's like mile 40. And U-Barrow wasn't all that bad. I'm going up there. Gavin Dale and Donnie Clark. And we also had Noah. We had a 14-year-old kid come and join us. Like, I'll say something about that. Like Noah Wadsworth and his dad, Kirk. But climbed up and over U-Barrow, and then we like ran down to the Col, like 600 feet. And then the second climb is up this peak, Red Pike. And I don't know how big that climb is, like maybe another 2,000 foot climb or something, 1,500 foot climb. I don't even know, 1,000-foot climb. It doesn't really matter. I think what happened, because I like pissed at the top of Red Pike and it was like super dark, but I was going up, and at one point I like wiped my hand across my face and all my vision just went gray and like black, and like my ears were like started ringing like so much, like I could like barely hear, like all I could hear was my ears ringing. And I think it was just extreme. I think I was just extremely dehydrated. The only other thing I think would be like heat stroke or something, or like some sort of heat, issue. But I think it was dehydration, and I just, drank a ton, and, we just like, I didn't stop. I just kept moving and just drank. I like pounded like the liter of water that my pacers had. And then I turned to like Noah and like Kirk, his dad, and like they had a ton of like electrolyte mix. And I was kind of like worried about hyponatremia of like taking in a ton of electrolytes. I don't know if that's like, and then like, drinking a ton of water. So, but I was like, fuck it. Like, I don't, it doesn't matter. And so I just like drank all this electrolyte mix. And then like Noah, this like 14-year-old kid, had like water mixed with juice. And like, he gave me like all the water and juice he had. And it was like amazing. And then eventually we ran to where John Toombs had hiked in a bunch of water. So we got that, and we were all good. And then, but once I got all that like liquid in me, was like, it goes like Red Pike, and then it's pretty flat, and you go out to Steeple, and and then, you go up to Pillar. Like once we got to the base of Pillar, to climb up to Pillar, it was like it was fine from there to the finish. Like it was like horrible. Like it was so painful, but it was like, it wasn't like a catastrophic, like nosedive into the ground. And it is fascinating to me, like how you can run further and things can feel much, much better than they did when you had like run less of a distance. And like, it's not because you stop. It's because you just, you're either something has to change, but, it's just interesting how that kind of is. And yeah, Noah. So Kilian, if you watch the video of Kilian running the bob, he had this, I don't know how old the kid was, like 13, 14-year-old kid he takes a selfie with. And so I think Noah had seen that, and he like messaged me and was like, hey, can I like meet you out on course and like maybe take a selfie or something? And I'm like, I guess Kilian did it. So, that's built into the schedule now. But I was like thinking like, oh my God, I'm definitely going to stop. But like, if I miss this by like 5 seconds, like I'm going to like fucking, be crying afterwards. And so Noah and his dad, I don't know how far they drove from, but they said they like raced to get to the end of leg 3, and they ran with us basically for the entirety of leg 4. And yeah, it was really cool. Like I really did enjoy having them out there. And like Noah is like a very good descender for sure. I mean, he was able to, I wasn't going uphill very quickly. I think I was going downhill like decently. Yeah, Noah was pretty good. So, and then, rolling on further in leg 4, Matt Atkinson actually hiked back out and met us again. And he met us at the base of Great Gable. And like, I saw this like person up ahead of us, and like, I didn't really know who it was. And then we got closer, and I like saw it was him. And like, Matt was the one who like nabbed all of like leg 3. And like, I mean, I almost started crying. I was just like so touched that he like came out. And I was just like so stoked to have him like there to like guide us, the rest of the way. And then we picked up a couple more guys. Just like as we were going, we just kept picking up more and more people. So we picked up like Jacob Tonkin, like Phil Winskill on the summit of Green Gable. And then we dropped down to Honister Pass, which is the start of leg 5. And like, it was crazy, like passing Gray Knots where like Kilian sat down for 7 minutes, where Billy Bland sat down for like 10 minutes back in the day. Like people said like that was like the curse of Billy Bland, like forcing Kilian to sit down there. Like it just felt great just to like fucking just like rip through there and just like pick up like so much time just by doing absolutely like other than just like not stopping, and then like rip through Honister, pick up 3 minutes. And yeah, it just felt amazing. And then, we get up, it's like a 1,500 foot climb out of Honister up Dalehead. And like, I've been dreading it, but it just like rolled pretty smooth. We had like Rich Keefe and like Johnny Cox come out were the leg 5 pacers, but like everybody who was on leg 4 just like continued on to leg 5. And we went and, we hit Dale Head, and then you drop down just like fucking 300 feet, and then Heinz Scarth, and then you drop down like maybe 500 or 600 feet, and then Robinson, and then that's it. And like at that point, I was like, fuck, like I just can't. The descent off Robinson is like rowdy, and I was like, fuck, like I just can't fall here. Like it's honestly, it's the hardest descent on the entire thing. And Matt again like took us on some pretty like wazoo lines, and then we had to go down this like, it's like a much better ski line, I imagine, hypothetically, than like an actual running line. It's just like steep, like a very thin layer of scree over like hard packed dirt. And so it's like running down like marbles or something. And you just have to like lean back, and you don't even surf. You kind of do surf. It's just like, you just lean back and you just slide down the dirt, and it's like kind of horrifying. Yeah, we get to the base of the valley, and then it's just like, you're just like running on like a flat golf course for a while. And then, yeah, you get on the road, and it's like 5.5 miles of road running. So ran the first like 3/4 of a mile in my fell shoes. And then we got to where like the support crew was, and they cut the laces off my shoes. The transition took way longer than I wanted, because like I had Alf flies there, and like the uppers are so stretchy on them. Like it was impossible to get my fucking feet in. And like, they're telling me like, put your feet forward, and like my whole leg like cramps up. And I'm like, I wish someone got a video of it. Like there's a video of Finley's transition, and it's like 45 seconds. And mine was like probably at least a minute and a half. And and the Alpha flies were kind of expensive, but it just like made the last bit just like so much more enjoyable. Like I had never run in those shoes before. I ran them like for 2 miles the day before, and it's like so springy and fun to run on them. And we had picked up some more folks on the summit of Robinson, and I believe we picked up more folks on the road, and then we just like ran it in from there. Like Billy Bland showed up on his bicycle and like was biking with me and everything, and like talking to me. And like Billy had told me before in the days before, he was like, hey, nobody's ever done a 5 mile an hour Bob Graham. Like, it's not that hard. Like it's a hiking route. It's not a running route. Like you're only going, no one's even averaged 5 miles an hour. And so he like pulls it next to me, and he's like, you're going to do it. You're going to go 5 miles an hour. And, I like started crying a little bit. And then like, I was like so exhausted, like, didn't really have the energy to do that anymore. And, it was just cool, because like, I was like straight lining it, trying to take like the shortest, like this curvy ass road that like does have like some fucking hills. There's like 2 hills, like 100-foot, 200-foot hills on the asphalt that are just horrendous. And I was like straight lining it on these super windy roads that people drive so fast on. And like the pacers like formed like they had some guys like go out ahead to like, stop traffic. And like the pacers, like, one guy was always like right in front of me and like stepping out like into traffic. And it was just very cool. And then, we just ran it in, and, you finish, and like, it's just like so traumatic that you just like, kind of die on the finish. And, the biggest thing for me was just like so many people took like so much time out to like come out. And, I had never met, like the first time I met half these pacers, or most of these pacers, like was when they showed up to pace me. Like, I'm trying to think of there were people I barely even talked to. And like the first time I ever really even talked to them, other than like 1 or 2 WhatsApp messages, was when they showed up to like pace me. And like, there was somebody, Lisa, I can't remember her last name, begins with a B, but she is the ranger over on Helvellyn, one of the peaks. Like she had hiked in water. John Toombs had hiked in water. Paul Wilson, like the head of the Bob Graham Club, was out there and hiked in water. Like tons of people, like on a road crew, like Martin, obviously, Sophie Lamb, and just like all these people like took so much time out to support me. Like they would have been totally happy to do it and have me not set the record. Like nobody would have been like frustrated with me or anything. Like I think as long as I tried, but it was just like really cool to like you try to give back to them what like they gave to me. I mean, I don't know how, I honestly, I mean, I'm sure there are some ways, there definitely are ways, but I don't know, like from a physical, some sort of endurance perspective, like, I don't know how you can get like a better experience than that, because it's like, I think what Beth said is like, hey, when you like go to a race, like everybody's there to watch the race. They're not there to watch you. And like and like everybody who works at the race is there, for the race. They're not there for you, but like everybody who's there for the Bob is like there for you. And it's a really incredible experience. And, what someone else had told me was like, hey, like the Bob is like kind of like your wedding, like, it's your special day, and like everybody else just comes out to support. And that's really what it's like. So, yeah, just a really, really, kind of crazy, incredible experience. And, yeah, pretty wild. So,
dude, I think you just set the record for the longest single track monologue. I'm not sure whether you're joking.
Wow. Got to get the stopwatch on that. Yeah.
No, that's
Nice.
awesome, man. I mean, I think you kind of already touched on it there, but what does all of this mean to you? Because there's a lot of factors at play now, right? Like you just set the FKT and the Bob Grand Round, so you're instantly in the conversation for international status when it comes to being a mountain ultra trail athlete. So I don't know, like what does all this mean? Like, how are you processing this? Like, what is this FKT? What does this effort mean to you a couple days removed from the experience?
Well, one thing, so like, I know the Huberman Lab podcast gets some shout outs on here. And one thing I've been trying to do is he talks about how like, for every high that you experience, like afterwards, you're basically going to experience like an equivalent low. And like, I don't know, why it's, has to do with like some sciencey shit with like, dopamine in your brain and,
Yep.
and everything. So he talks about like, really, if you want, I have experienced that. Like, you go and, you race something and it's like a great time. And then a couple of days later, like you're in the van and it's like raining outside and like you're fucking, shitting into a gallon freezer bag and throwing it out in the trash can at the park. And you're like, God, this like, just like kind of fucking blows right now. And, and so I've been working on trying, just keeping that in mind and just trying to keep my life like a little bit more even keeled than just like, riding the lightning between like these different experiences. And then obviously you're going to have experiences where things don't work. I mean, of course it's a little bit different because we're talking about like, a dopamine high followed by like a dopamine low. So I've been trying to keep things more even, in my life, and I've been trying to just, and I always have enjoyed the process, but trying to just focus on enjoying the process and, whatever happens with the racing happens. I'm training to be fast, but, that's not the only reason. Like if I'm not enjoying it and enjoyment isn't the highest thing. If I'm not getting something out of it day to day, then that's not sustainable for me. So what does this mean? I mean, I'm not really sure. What does it mean for me? It means my season is probably over for this season. And, trying to think what else does it mean? I got free fries when I finished. Like that was pretty narrowly pretty good. But like, yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, it was a cool experience. And it was probably the most incredible thing it's definitely the most incredible. That is the most incredible day of my entire life. Like, I don't know if it's ever possible to top that. I don't really know how. I don't know what that means. But I mean, it was many parts of it were incredibly awful. And like I never really, it's hard to say if there was any moments where I was really happy throughout the day. But certainly the most incredible day of my entire life. Yeah. 100%.
How stout is this new time?
It's not, I don't think it's as stout as Beth's time. Cause like, if you look, like when I'm trying to evaluate how fast an FKT is and there isn't a ton of male times, I'll like look at the like female times in comparison to the men's time. And I was talking to Beth about this, and like Beth said she had done the same thing for her own time, which I thought was kind of funny, because if Beth has simultaneously, run the second fastest time at Western States and the fastest time at the Bob. And so Jim's time at Western States is much faster than Kilian's time on the Bob. But if you were to say, hey, like Jim's time at Western States is equivalent to Kilian's time on the Bob, then if you compare if you start with like the delta, the percentage difference between like Beth's time and Kilian's time on the Bob, and you instead apply that to Western States, it would mean Beth running like a 15:45 or something at Western States, or faster, 15:34. And I don't know what her time is. She has the second fastest time. I don't know what it is. I don't even
High
guess.
16s,
Like just over
maybe,
7.
low 17s.
I think it's like just over 17. And so based on that, interestingly enough, Beth, I think, did it on a day with kind of, what would be traditionally considered shit conditions. It was colder, it was a little bit wetter, it was overcast. So I don't think it was actually actively raining. I think the rocks were probably dry, but I think that's kind of the move. Like that's kind of the weather you want. But she did, I think, have it a little bit boggier out there. So based on that, if you look at my splits are good. I mean, obviously you can always go faster, but my times are consistent except for that bit from the end of leg 3 until like pillar or so, I believe. And then you have the minute and a half I spent trying to get my shoes on. But other than that, really no stops in the aid stations. So how stiff is the time? I don't really know. Somebody can always just be faster than you, but there weren't. How stiff is the time for me? Like I couldn't have done any faster. I was talking today about Martin, like, hey, like what are the mistakes like that actually affected how the day went? And one of them was like just me not drinking enough. And of course, if I had drank more, then that would mean my pacers carrying more water. And that would mean more weight on them. So I possibly would have dropped more of my pacers. So maybe the answer was to have more people back there with water meeting us in different places. And we did have 3 people doing that. So that was that. And then the only other issue is just coming down Blencathra, coming down Halls Fell. We took kind of a shit line and that added a minute, I think. So, for me, I couldn't personally cut much time off of that unless, I just somehow trained better,
Well, a couple miscellaneous questions for you before we close out. I'm curious, given your skill set, what FKTs out there are still left for you to do? Like what inspires you? What could you possibly do next from a running standpoint? Maybe not this season because, you're closing it out, but like if we look forward to 2023, what's on your radar?
Yeah. So I should say like, this is like stuff that, there are tons of things. These are like things that I'm interested in because I feel like they're competitive, like they're accessible for me and they interest me. And I think that would be like the ones that are accessible to me right now would be probably like Lakeland's 24 hours. So it's the 24-hour record for most peaks summited in like, the area. The route looks very similar to the Bob Graham. It just like has like a million out and backs basically. And it's like slightly bigger loop. And that right now is about 93 miles and like 39,000 feet of climbing. Kim Collason has it, a local dude. I believe Kim lives in the lakes. And so that's a very, very competitive route. So that's one. I think in the UK, that might be, there's another one on Isle of Skye, the Coolin Ridge Traverse, which Finley has, but it is 5th class. And I think it's a little bit too scary for me. Back in the States, I think Mount Whitney Mountaineers route round trip has been one I've been looking at for a long time. Potentially redoing White's, potentially redoing the Prezi, potentially redoing the Hut Traverse, potentially going back and racing the Great Range Traverse for Ryan Atkins' time. Boulder Skyline Traverse, maybe, which Joe Gray has. Nolan's, I think maybe just a little bit too far for me right now. I don't know if I'm interested in just kind of being out that long. The Whirl, possibly. Again, like I don't want to get like your whatever cancer dust you got blowing out of the Great Salt Bowl over there.
Hey, we're going to delete that from the conversation. Only good things about Salt Lake on here.
What else? And then like ones that are kind of beyond me. I mean, the Whirl has some 5th class on it, like Long's Peak, Grand Teton, Half Dome, but it seems like it's a clusterfuck with like the permits and all the people up there. So that may never be an option. I don't know. And I'm sure there's some, it seems like a lot of the stuff in Europe there's a lot of like round trip peak, records. I think Mount Blanc would be cool. Kilian's line on it, but like, that's one where it seems like the whole mountain is fucking falling apart. And maybe I'd have to figure out how I'd handle the acclimatization for that. I don't know how acclimatized Kilian was, but like, why wouldn't I acclimatize super heavily for it? So, and then and there's stuff on skis too, Rainier, Denali, Shasta again. I think like Tom Goth has like a bunch of like FKTs that he has, in his notes or on Strava, like around peaks in Utah. So, and then there's a route that goes across the Sierra that someone just set an FKT on, and I actually recce'd, but, I didn't like the conditions, on skis. So it's like a high Sierra trail on skis, which is kind of cool. So
since the last time we've talked, Outside Magazine has Outside Online, I guess you'd call it, has purchased fastestknowntime.com. I know that you were heavily involved pre-Outside era. What are your thoughts on that sale? And take that wherever you want.
So, I mean, obviously my thoughts aren't terribly positive because I am no longer affiliated. Well, actually, I actually might come back on. But I was just talking to Allison Mercer about it. But so what kind of bothers me about it, like Buzz obviously did this like publicity blitz after he did it, and like he came on your pod and on Dylan's, and like his argument was like, I felt kind of, I mean, honestly, I was like, I'm just be straight up, I was like fucking kind of insulted by the way Buzz kind of handled it. And like Buzz and Peter know how passionate I am, and like we didn't find out, the regional editors didn't find out until the deal was already finalized, and like it was like the morning, it was like 2 hours before they told everybody. They did a Zoom, and which I didn't even show up to, so it showed how much I guess I cared. But Buzz likes to say, hey, people want stuff on the internet, but they don't want to pay for it. And it's like, look, like here's my fucking example. Like, okay, let me say, nobody asked for the FKT site that they created. Like, nobody asked for a site with like, that was, super nice, super slick, very professional. Like, nobody asked for that. Like, it could have been a Google Drive with a directory of Google Docs in it with like a list of approved editors for those Google Docs. Like, that's all it needed to be. It never had to be, or it had to be some, some free wiki with like banner ads. Like, if you wanted to make it more formal, like, that's cool, but like nobody was like demanding that you do that. Nobody, like, the image hosting was the thing that was ridiculous to me. It's like, host your images on Strava or on Instagram, and I'm sure that took up tons of fucking server space. It's like, here I am like spraying from my high horse about like not accepting free gear. Like, I went to some event yesterday and like they gave me a free pair of Innovate shorts, and I was looking at these Innovate shorts. I'm wearing them right now. Very nice shorts, like way too nice shorts, but these shorts are like 50 pounds. They're like $60. And like, they're probably worth that much money, but like, you don't need to buy shorts that are like this expensive. Like, you can buy shorts that are like way fucking cheaper than this. And like, all they need to do is just like hide your genitalia. Like, it doesn't have to be as nice, like with a zippered pocket and like these bungees, and like these shorts are like incredibly nice. And like this FKT site, like, didn't need to be what it was, but they made it. They built something based on donations and volunteer hours, and then they consulted nobody, and they sold it for an unknown amount of money. It's not comparable to Strava because I was not paid, and Strava is not run on donations. I am a Strava subscriber because I like the features that Strava provides, and I'm happy to fucking pay for that. And Buzz always loves to dismiss the drama like, hey, did you pay? It's like, yeah, I paid in my fucking man hours fucking working on that website. That's how I paid. So, and then at the end of the day, like, I think Buzz and Peter could have done basically whatever they wanted. And as long as they kind of like treated me and the other regional editors with respect, and, at least, pretended to include it in the decision-making process or consult us or whatever, but that wasn't done. And I walked away with it thinking, hey, Buzz and Peter just like never really fucking respected me. which is, totally fucking cool. But I'm not, I don't really know. I got so annoyed with the entire thing and just like the way FKTs were just like, I don't know, just like became kind of dumb. I don't even want to go into the whole thing, but just like the whole, there was a while, like I was like, I'm not even going to use the term FKT anymore. Like I'm just going to use the term record because we know it is the fastest time because everybody, sprays on social media and Strava about it at this point. So we can just call it records. And here they do not like the term FKT. Like they use the term record by that same logic. They're like, hey, everybody's going to like disclose what they do. So, yeah, that was my take on that situation. So
last conversational thread, we'll bring it back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation. Sponsorship. You are probably a wanted entity now, definitely now a known entity, but maybe a wanted entity by all the major trail and mountain running brands in our sport. So are you going to entertain that? Are you going to take any? What's your stance there?
No, I'm not going to. I don't want to. Well, I'd say I am not interested right now. I'm not going to say anything absolutist and hold myself for the rest of my fucking life to like something I say in this conversation. But it's just really tricky because like part of me a couple days ago was like, okay, can I just like never accept any free equipment from anybody? And, okay, I'm not going to accept any money, not going to accept any free equipment, but it's like, okay, what about pro deals? Like I've used pro deals for, years. I had pro deals in the military. I have pro deals through Uphill Athlete. What about like Miller, who, works for Innovate, clearly found out about me through Innovate. She, I think, would have helped me either way. And she told me like, hey, like, I would help you either way. Like, this isn't about Innovate, but, she basically, in a way, paid me in sweat equity by like tracking down all these pacers. And like, Tori's fantastic. She's like, such a great person, but it's, I don't really even know what I'm getting at here, but, no, I'm not interested. Like I can pay my bills using the money I get for coaching. And I had this conversation with, New Hampshire runner, Dan Kurtz. Kid needs a lot of help. So I try to do it, but it's a full-time job. And, Dan was kind of talking about, sponsorship. And I was like, look, like, I want you to name all the things that Jim Walmsley has that I don't, working, I don't know what, 15 hours a week or whatever I work for Uphill Athlete. Maybe that's understating it. I have no idea. I've never really calculated it. And really like Jim probably can afford like nicer living accommodations than I can. He can like maybe afford to eat nicer food and, maybe get like massages or like talk to a sports psychologist or something. I don't really know, but I can like, listen to the Huberman Lab podcast and like Tim Ferriss and, I can, buy a massage gun off Amazon, which I don't even use. I'm not even like really big into massages. And, I can basically get everything he has just by working, granted that comes from a position of enormous privilege to be able to do that. And also I can kind of like, for me, like the psychological frame is like so important that I approach training in. And if I was a full-time sponsored athlete, I would approach training as like, I am here to like punch the clock as like an employee for like craft sports or something. And personally, like, more power to you if you can do that. But like, I couldn't, like, I would just go fucking crazy. And I think like, I tend to like stress and like get, for a bit anxious. And I think like it would just weigh super heavily on me that like my income is dependent on me performing well. And like Uphill, like, doesn't really give a fuck, like, what I do personally as far as racing. Like, I'd like to think I'm a decent coach and that's all I need to be. So like my racing is just for me and me alone. And the training is just for me and me alone. And, I think that's fun. I mean, the only other thing that like the training and stuff is for is, it's because I am kind of passionate about, I wouldn't call myself like an anti-capitalist, but I am kind of passionate about these like kind of anti-consumerist ideas and like pushing them by being fast. And I think that's like the most effective way to push them. And, you know, I think I'll just summarize by the way Billy Bland put it to me. He was like, I don't understand sponsored fell runners. Like, I go in the mountains to like do my own thing and to be out there on my own, and like nobody tells me what the fuck to do. And like if somebody tells me what the fuck to do, I'm gonna do the exact fucking opposite, is what Billy told me. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's my hero. So
all right, a couple more questions here for you actually before we close up. We were talking before this recording just in general about your training that I want to come back to, and you mentioned how this quote unquote psychological framing is important, or it's critical in order to kind of cobble together these massive weeks of training for events like the Bob and the White Mountains 100. And then you've also mentioned stuff about like changing your environment frequently too. So can you go just into depth about that and in your whole philosophy there?
Yeah. So what I found is there's just enormous interplay between, how you feel physically and how you feel mentally. And what I find is like, I'd be running out in the east side of the Sierra, and I would get sick of training, sick of running. I wouldn't want to go out for a run in any context. And I would kind of change the modality or change the environment. I would go around to Yosemite, and I'd go and, run at Yosemite, and all of a sudden I would have this like, enormous interest in running. And it's beyond just like, oh, I don't want to run Sierra anymore. I don't want to run Yosemite anymore. It's like whether I have an interest in running, period. And it's also how I feel physically. And again, like that is a huge privilege to be able to travel around like that, or to be able to go from, skiing in one area, like, okay, I'm sick of skiing. Like I'm going to drive somewhere where I can run now. But yes, so from that, I've just found that just like everything is in the mind. Like people always say, like, I don't, know how PC this, not PC, but I don't know. People always say that like, the mind is like the most important, like sexual organ. It's like the mind is like the most important organ, for training also. And, so it's like any way you can kind of like build that novelty and that fun into training and like make it exciting and like vary the stimulus is so important for trying to just like maximizing your physical potential. And I think that just goes way more beyond like, oh, I do want to run here, I don't want to run here. It's like, it has, it's very physical.
Last question. I know that you rattled off a bunch of FKTs that you could potentially be interested in next year, but I've also heard you say before that you don't think that there are enough competitive records, FKTs, whatever you want to call it, out there on the circuit right now. So can you go a little bit in depth into why you think that?
Yeah. So I think a large part of it is just like the idea of FKTs is very new. So it really, being able to verify FKTs is only with the onset of like wearable GPS devices. So there just isn't enough of a history of racing on these routes. Just hasn't been enough time. And then I think it's just, it's just a cultural thing. People are used to racing in races, and that's where competition is kind of concentrated. And if people do FKTs, like typically they're secondary projects, like for the top athletes. But I think we basically have gotten to the point where, a sponsor will equally entertain one of their athletes doing an FKT or doing a traditional race. I don't really think that's too much of a factor, unless, of course, it's a race that they are putting on, which certainly can have an impact. But I mean, there's also an issue of just the FKT site did a very poor job of like establishing what the top routes were, what the premier routes were in each area. And so the competition has just gotten fairly diluted because people come into the sport and they just don't really know what the top routes and what the most important efforts are. And so that, kind of is a vicious cycle. Like people don't know what the most competitive routes are. So then the most competitive runners don't do any routes. And then, it just kind of goes from there. So, yeah, I think that's probably the issues.
I keep saying last question, but this is truly the last one. What athletes out there in our community are inspiring you the most right now? We've talked about Kilian a lot, but who are you deriving the most inspiration from at this particular moment in time? Could be non-running too.
Yeah, dude, I'm just like, my brain is just kind of cooked, and like this is the type of question that I would like fuck up in an interview and just like say some just like totally wazoo shit. Dude, I don't even. I mean, I feel like a dick. Like I don't even know what the hell to say. I mean, it's like, to be honest, like I do. It's like tricky for me because it's funny. Like I'll talk to people who don't race as much as I do, and they like know way more about like trail running than I do. And it's like I talked to Kyle Richardson a lot like about this. Like there was a moment earlier this year where I was just kind of, I don't know what it is. I think I would go out, and once I got out of the military, like, outdoor sports, like, mountain sports, like became my entire life. And like, I would go out and I would run, and then, I'd get back and I'd have like uphill athlete, my job, coaching people for running. And then I would like listen to like a running podcast or like, go on Instagram, and it's all like runners and skiers. And, like, I couldn't do it anymore. And I like unfollowed, like, I mean, I would never, I see like in a sport like that's so influencer dominated where so many people get their money, and like how many followers you have is like such a, not a currency, but it's like such a important testament of like the influence you have in the community. Personally, I don't like unfollowing people because I think it's just like kind of disrespectful, but like I went through and I like muted so many trail runners, not because I like didn't like them or I didn't care. It was just like I couldn't keep reading this shit. Like I was just going fucking crazy. And I talked to Kyle Richardson. He told me he did the same thing. And he's like, he told me, he's like, I don't consume that much running media, just because it's just too much. And for whatever reason, I think my relationship with it has gotten a little bit better. I think just adjusting to kind of like being out. It's funny, like if you go on my TikTok, like I don't post anything on TikTok, but like I enjoy going on TikTok. I have never liked, commented, interacted, watched any video of the outdoors. Like I see it, I immediately skip it. Like I want the algorithm to know. Like I don't give a fuck about anything that's like happening outside generally, because like I go on TikTok and it's like there's nothing outdoor related. And whereas like I go on Instagram and like primarily like my feed is like skiing and climbing, and it's not like skimo, it's like free skiing, and it's like, sport climbing, like a lot of it. And because that's like shit I don't do. So it's like, I don't feel like this like, competitive, like, I don't know what, when I like look at this shit. So yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like a dick saying that, but
I think it's a great answer.
It's like, if I had to say, I will say one person, and that's like Finley, because Finley, he's the best fell runner in the UK. And what Billy Bland was kind of lamenting was like, we have all these great races in the UK, but all of our best trail runners, they all go abroad. Like nobody sticks around. And Finley has stuck around, and he does race some in Europe, but he races a lot in the UK. And he's incredibly good, and like people just like don't really realize it. I think he's especially good at the shorter stuff. And yeah, and he's the man. He's got his own podcast, Go Mountain Goats. Everybody should listen to it. After you listen to all Finn's episodes, of course, but he's got a website too. He's got a website where he has like top 10 leaderboards for like routes all across like Scotland and the UK more broadly, which is like very cool to kind of check out and kind of like incentivizes people who aren't like gunning for the top time to kind of like go for this stuff. So yeah,
I think, like I said, I think it's a great answer, and I'm trying to think of where I want to go with this. I think that there's a huge benefit to diversifying the content that you consume on the internet, like what you're talking about with TikTok. Like maybe you somehow find a way to pair your interests in FKTs and trail running with, like, I don't know, nuclear fission or something like that. I mean, you could literally pick any combination, but just to make you like a more well-rounded, interesting human being who can like talk on more subjects and think about the world in more interesting ways and make unique connections. By the way, I should say, I'm sure there's a bunch of listeners out that are like, why aren't you guys elaborating on these last 4 questions I've asked you? We could probably go for like 6 hours if we wanted to. And like, I probably will. Like at some point we'll have another conversation about like commercialization in our sport and your whole philosophy there, because I think it's fascinating. And so any listeners out there that are like mad that we're not elaborating, it's because you just finished an FKT. We've been going for 2 hours. This podcast doesn't typically go more than 2, and we're tired.
Well, let me say one more thing. I'm going to say one more thing that really pisses me off, that I think this is something nobody's ever commented on. And there's this thing that like sponsored athletes do that drives me fucking crazy. And that's when they post, not even sponsored, it's like everybody, it's some people. And they will post videos of them running or training on social media. And it's always them running fast as fuck. It's always them running like super, super quick. And it like builds this like mystique of like speed all around the fastest guys or women. That's just like fastest people. And it like kind of annoys me, because I think it encourages people to overtrain, and it encourages people to like underestimate themselves, because they see like, you know, reels of people like sprinting uphill and just like doing like stupid shit. And I'll like, you know, to what extent my opinion matters, I'll tell you, like, these motherfuckers are not training like that 24/7. And if they are, they're going to fucking burn out. Or they're like maybe just like doing like, you know, 10-minute uphill. If they're just doing like sub-hour races, like maybe that's how they train. But like other than that, that's like not the way they would train. And it does, every time I see it, it fucking bothers me. Yeah. So.
Well, dude, it's always a great time chatting with you. I appreciate unraveling everything that went into the FKT and giving us insight into like truly minute details on the route the day it happened. Huge congratulations. It's a monumental FKT. I think it shakes up a lot of what people think are possible in our sport. And anytime you take down a Kilian Jornet record, everyone kind of pauses and reflects. And that's all after they say, you know, who the fuck is this guy? But you know, I think you already had great name recognition in the FKT world, but this definitely puts you on an even higher pedestal for whatever that is worth. Apparently you're going to turn down all of those offers to commercialize yourself, at least for the time being, which, you know, I think we probably have separate views on that, but I always admire people that take principled stands and just have an opinion. Like above all else, I just appreciate people that have opinions. You definitely have opinions. And so, yeah, man, it's great to have you on, and just truly congrats again. And we'll do a round 3 at some point in the future.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. You get a lot of, when you live in a van by yourself or a truck, you get a lot of time to just think and kind of go a little crazy. So yeah, but thank you. Yeah.